as we move forward in these ways. And so, with so much going on, a question that I thought I would, talk about, because let me just say, for the next few weeks, let's see, there's this week, next week, and I think the following week, right? Maybe 2 more weeks after that. We'll be coming up to the conference. So we're going to be having a special speaker. I'll tell you next week who that is. On the week before the conference, sort of a few days before the conference, we'll be having a speaker. I believe he is from the Ukraine, and he'll be here with Michael Schiffman. And that will be just before the beginning of the conference. I think that's the 15th of July. Then the following week is the conference. And then I will tell you, we are going to, this just in, the week after is Camp Yeladim, and that's a service, a special service at the end of Camp Yeladim. And then our good friend Jerry Feldman is going to be here, passing through town, and he'll be with us on, I think it is the 5th of August. So after that, we'll kind of get back to normal and start a whole new series and so on. But, for the next few weeks, I thought, well, I should really talk about, all that's happening and all that we're doing and being ready and being prepared and things like that. And so then the question is, ready for what? When we say, are we ready? Ready for what? We could say, well, ready for, our conference. Are we ready, not just with the myriad of little details that we spend these days so much time thinking about, many, many details. Then there's Camp Yeladim. Will we be ready for that? And of course, there's all kinds of ways of being ready. There's the doing it, right? The simply pulling it off kind of. Are we ready? But then we could say, and it would be right to say, are we praying about these things? Are we undergirding everything with prayer? Are we being built up in the Word of God? Are we being strengthened for the task by the Ruach HaKodesh? So often we separate these things as if our spirituality and spiritual readiness is I pray every day, or I read the Bible every day, or I'm reading through the Bible in a year, or things of that nature. And we say, well, that's good enough. Good, I pray every day. I read the Bible. I sense, being strengthened for the task. But it's interesting. Yeshua actually talks about readiness in the big scheme of things. In the big scheme of things, which includes the smaller things along the way, right? And so I thought we would talk just a little bit about Yeshua's exhortation to us of being just ready. And what does that mean? There's something certainly a lot bigger than being ready for events, that we host or put on, whether it be the service, have to deal with that readiness, or we're talking about the conference or Camp Yeladim or MSI or the Visiting Scholar Symposium or anything that we do. There's something bigger. And Yeshua talks about it in a number of places in the Gospels, and most famously, I would say, in the Gospel of Matthew. And it was toward the end of his life. Yeshua exhorts us to always be ready, to always be alert. For what? Of course, for his return, when he will be king in this world, and empires will end, and the Messianic empire will be here in earnest and in person, physically, and the messianic promises will come to fruition. And so Yeshua exhorts us to be ready and alert. And it's really kind of interesting the way he does it and really what he says about it. Because sometimes we misunderstand it a little bit. So toward the end of his life, Yeshua gave a speech, a discourse, right? At the Mount of Olives, right? And he talked about, his return. He talked about his return and events that would precede his return. You know, it's in Matthew chapter 24, right? Now, many have studied this passage backwards, forwards, and sideways, trying to figure out the signs of the times. Trying to figure out, is it now? Is it now? And many people, may I say, have made a fortune trying to figure out the signs of the times and have written everything from commentaries to novels or novel commentaries about trying to figure out, is it now? Is it this year? Is it next year? Well, I came to faith in Yeshua in 1976, and I will tell you that every year people have said, since then, I can tell you, and I'm sure before, that now is the time, right? Certainly there was remember the 10-nation common market? Remember that? It was kind of like the Big Ten, going to 11 and then going to 12, and people thought, this is it. The world domination, one world government, this is it. Not anymore, right? Then there was Y2K, and sandwiched in between there was 1988. That was a banner year, which was supposed to be, the end. Now, what do all of these authors, what do all of these people that write all these books all have in common? Every single one of them to this day, they are all wrong. Every one of them. Every single one of them is wrong. Right? Because Yeshua himself, this is what I love about these folks that have it kind of figured out. Even if they use the caveat, well, I don't really have it figured out, but I just want to warn people, that Yeshua himself, when asked, we read it in Acts chapter 1. When he was asked in verse 6 of Acts 1, when they had come together, they were asking him, saying, Lord, is it at this time that you are restoring the kingdom to Israel? That is like saying, Lord, when is going to be the consummation? When is going to be the lion laying down with the lamb? When is going to be all those messianic promises? And so I am so tempted to say something, to mention a name or two, but I won't. I was going to say, Yeshua said, ask. No, but I won't. Okay? What did Yeshua say? He said, it is not for you to know times or epochs, which the Father has fixed by his own authority. But you shall receive power when the Ruach HaKodesh, when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses, both in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the remotest part of the earth. In other words, he says, the Father has fixed this by his own authority, and only he knows. And so Yeshua himself did not answer that question. Kind of interesting, when you think about that so many people are so sure when clearly Yeshua taught, as we'll see, that we do not know, right? And so when we read the Olivet Discourse, as it's called, the passage in Matthew 24 about the return of the Lord, and all of the and preceding signs and so on, sadly, we are missing the point of what Yeshua was trying to make. Okay? The point, if you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Matthew chapter 24. And, it's actually the speech of Yeshua, or sermon of Yeshua, is a very good illustration of how to give a message. Because at the end, he makes an application. At the end, he says what the purpose of it is. It's very interesting because when you come to the end of the speech, and you come to Matthew chapter 24, verse 42, it's a long speech, right? This is what he says. Therefore, be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason, you be ready too. For the Son of Man is coming. And of course, Son of Man, you think of Daniel in the 7th chapter, coming in the clouds and so on, as Yeshua talks about in this chapter, earlier in this chapter. The Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. So therefore, all of our author friends are doing us a favor. Because if they say, well, it seems like it's going to be now, well, I guess not. Okay? The Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. You know what it reminds me of a little bit is, the most learned people, in the Second Temple period, were the Pharisees. And there's a lot of good things we could say about them in their understanding of the Scriptures and their belief in the coming of a Messiah and the resurrection and miracles and all that. But he was standing right in front of them and did not recognize him. I mean, that's a sobering thought. Why are we any better than them? True, we have the Ruach. I mean, that would be an answer. We have the Spirit of God, But still, let us not be so presumptuous to think we have it figured out one way or the other, right? So what does Yeshua say here? He says, be alert, be ready. What does it mean to be alert? What does it mean to be ready? Be awake, be watchful, be aware, be prepared. All those things. Not be lulled to sleep, as we'll see, right? So Yeshua, what he does now is he has given this message about his return, right? And then he says here in Matthew chapter 24, in verse 42, be on the alert, be ready, okay? Be prepared. And then what he is going to do now is tell several stories to illustrate the point. These famous parables. Now, something to be said about parables, in case you're not familiar, that generally speaking, they have a single meaning. They have one meaning. It's like a story with bam at the end. This is what it means. Each specific aspect of a parable is not necessarily symbolic of something. It's a story with a meaning. And so we want to read them very carefully. how does Yeshua conclude these stories? That's what we want to get. Is, well, why did he tell this story? And what are we supposed to get out of it? And oftentimes they end with a surprise. Now, of course, it's not a surprise to us if you've read it 100 times, right? If you've read a book over and over again, then you might say it's not a surprise until it is, right? So generally, they have a single meaning. We do not have to discern every aspect of the story necessarily, but try to understand what's the point. What am I supposed to get out of this? Okay? So there are 3 stories that he tells, right? One's about 2 slaves, one's about 10 virgins, and one's about 3 slaves and 8 talents. Right? I'll let you figure out the symbolism of 2, 10, 3, and 8. Okay? But here right here in chapter 24 at the end, he tells a story about 2 slaves. This one I will read. And it begins here in verse 45. Who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household, to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master isn't coming for a long time, and then it says, and shall begin to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. Weeping shall be there, and the gnashing of teeth. Okay? So basically, what Yeshua is saying, much like a proverbial kind of statement, you have a wise slave and you have a foolish slave. The wise slave is prudent. The wise slave is aware of his calling and aware of his accountability, is aware that the day will be when he will stand before God, right? The foolish one says, yeah, maybe someday, one of these days, but, it hasn't happened in 2,000 years. Why do I think it's going to happen now? And I'll have time to get my act together. But right now, this is, this is who I am. Or perhaps, as we'll see, not even thinking about the time, but just acting out in whatever way, and not realizing that we will stand before God. You know how it says on many a Aron HaKodesh, right? Know before whom you stand. Know before whom you stand. We need to remember that in our discourse with people, the way we speak, how we act, how we even form opinions. Know before whom you stand. And so what is Yeshua saying? What is his point? His point is that the day is going to come when this will be. Pay attention. Pay attention. Be alert. Be prepared. Be ready. And in our lives, that is quite a challenge when we are consumed with things to consume, right? When we are consumed with the world around us, with our worries, our concerns, which are myriad and which are all, I'm not saying anything's not important, but oftentimes what ends up happening is we are so frenetic in our lives, we forget who we are. And we forget that calling. And we forget that we will indeed stand before God. And Yeshua here exhorts us, never forget that calling and who you are. And may it influence every decision that you make. Okay? So in this little story here of these two slaves, we learn about accountability. That we are indeed accountable to God. Whether we remember that or not, it is indeed true. And then interesting here, the illustration in this chapter, in this little story, is interesting about how he describes the person who is lax, the person who is not thinking in terms of accountability. How that person is described. Notice what it says about that person. It doesn't say, they forgot to pray or they haven't read the Bible in a while. What it says is, and he began to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards. In other words, ethical behavior, the way we interact with people, and moral behavior is lax. We could just call it obedience to God, I suppose. But the way that we interact with people, the way that we conduct ourselves, do we do that knowing that, I will stand before God, and so every day, Lord, help me to have my correct boundaries, Lord. Help me to interact at work or wherever I may be in such a way that glorifies you. As we read in several different places in the Brit Hadashah scriptures, right? Whatever we do, whatever we say, may it indeed be for the glory of God. Because you know what? When we least expect it, the Master will come. When we least expect it, right? And so that means any time, and that takes some cultivating, having that kind of immediacy, because we have to live a balanced life of thinking both historically and we could say eschatologically, all at the same time. We have to think historically, in other words, planning for the future and so on. Yet, in all of our plans and in everything that we do, may we do so in such a way that we will not be humiliated and embarrassed. How about that? When Yeshua returns. Because certainly in the worst case scenario, we don't want to be engaged in something really bad when he returns. Right? While at the same time, in the big scheme of things, we want to be walking in the right way. So then you have another story. The 10 virgins, right? You know it. It's in Matthew chapter 25, right? It's in the first 13 verses. And so you have 10 virgins, lamps lit, waiting to meet the bridegroom, right? 5, again, foolish and wise. Very much like the book of Proverbs. 5 were foolish, 5 were prepared, called prudent, right? Some had lamps where they were not prepared and the oil runs out. The other 5 are prepared and have the oil. And so then, of course, when the bridegroom comes, there's not enough oil for the foolish ones. They want the oil from the wise ones, and it's too late. Of course, Yeshua takes an illustration from a Jewish wedding ceremony, right? Of the brides waiting for the groom to come and being prepared to go. And so we have to ask ourselves, am I prepared? Is my oil lamp lit? Am I ready? Don't fall asleep. Be awake, right? Again, because we don't know the hour. We can talk all about these 10 virgins, but when you come to verse 13, okay? in verse 13 of Matthew 25. Here's the point. Be on the alert, for you do not know the day or the hour. Okay? So, if you're ever studying these 10 virgins, and you're looking for, what does it mean? Why virgins? Why 10? Why oil? Why this? Don't forget verse 13. Okay? Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day or the hour. Be ready. Right? And then he tells another story. This is really interesting because sometimes people say, you kind of repeated yourself. Well, Yeshua's having a hard time landing the plane here. Okay? He gives a great message, about the fact that he's going to come back and what's going to, and then he tells 3 stories that basically kind of say the same thing. Wow, got to take that homiletics class, Yeshua. Okay, so anyway, the talents, right? The parable of the talents. Now, the story of the talents, first of all, talents were not like juggling, okay? Or singing ability, or any kind of ability. It was actually money, okay? There were sums of money. So the master is giving his slaves money to invest, okay? And so, there's a lot of lessons in this. So we see that at the beginning of it, without reading the whole thing, it begins in verse 14. So you have a man who's going to go on his journey, and he calls his servants, he calls them slaves, and it says, and he entrusted his possessions to them. Okay? And then it says he gave to one, he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and another 1, according to what they could handle, according to their ability, according to what they could do. And then he went on his journey. So, it is rather interesting. I was thinking about this, that perhaps these 3 stories are building on each other. It's like a snowball effect. You have the smallest one about the 2 slaves making the point, and then you have a story, more of a story about the 10 virgins, and then you have the talents, and the parable of the talents gives a little bit more meat on the bones about being ready and about the master and all of that. Because here we see that the master had confidence in his servants, in his slaves. He had confidence in them. He entrusted his possessions to them. Okay? He entrusted, that means, he gave them what was his for them to do something with for his purposes, right? And he gives them different amounts, by the way. It's not even Stephen, He gives them different amounts depending on what they can do and what they can handle, so to speak, their ability. The point just simply there is that he knows them. He knows them, and he has confidence in them, right? Then we read, the master comes back, and the ones that Yeshua, or the master, the man, is happy with is the one that makes the most with what he has. He makes the most with what he has. He does the most with what he has, right? And what do we gain? What do we gain from this? This particular story. This one is not just about be alert, but this one focuses more on what are you going to do in the meantime? How are you going to be ready? How are you going to be alert? Okay? And so one of the things we learn here is that when we apply this, certainly to ourselves, God has given us what we have. He's entrusted us. We are stewards, right? We like to use that word, right? We are stewards of all that we have. We need to use our resources to advance the cause. I'll just call it advance the cause of Yeshua in whatever capacity that is. In whatever it is, right? Use your resources that God has entrusted to you to advance the cause of Yeshua. Why? Because you are accountable to God for all of it. There will be a day of reckoning. There will be a day of accounting. And that is something that we need to always remember to help us be motivated to make right choices and right decisions. Not just about things, but about our time, about choices, the myriads of choices that we make in our lives. Is this something that is God-honoring? Am I acting in a way that is God-honoring? Am I following in his steps, as Peter tells us? Am I reacting to a situation in the right way? All the myriads of decisions. At the end, Yeshua explains that every action and interaction is a service to God. And this is really very interesting because after he tells these stories, then he says something else at the end of these stories. We read in verse 31 of Matthew 25, "But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?' And the king will answer and say, 'Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me.' And then, of course, we read again, it's the wise and the foolish. 'Then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink,' and so on. What Yeshua is getting at here, among other things, is that every action and interaction is a service to Yeshua. It is a service to the Messiah. Not even indirectly, but directly. A service to the Messiah. And I'm going to suggest that we can apply it beyond food and drink, and helping people, but in everything that we do, we are doing it to Yeshua. That should be a real sobering thought. In my speech or in the decisions I make, it doesn't just affect me. It's not just about me. Every action and interaction is a testimony to our readiness, our alertness for Yeshua to come. And so we always should take the long view of being ready for Yeshua, but also being aware and alert and looking for those opportunities right in front of us to serve. Right? For those opportunities to serve. That it's not simply a case of, we don't want to be the kind of people who don't think anything's important now, just wait for Yeshua. Or the opposite, or who knows when he's coming, it's not that important, and I'm just going to focus on, being a better me, or something like that, And so having the sort of the long view and the shorter view at the same time, looking for opportunities to serve Yeshua, and really sort of honing our readiness and our alertness, right? And it does indeed, as I said at the beginning, it does come through prayer, and it does come being in the Word of God, but not as an end unto themselves, but for us to be prepared and for us to be ready. And as we read in the book of Acts, we have been entrusted with all kinds of things. How about being entrusted with the living presence of Yeshua within us via the Ruach HaKodesh? We have been entrusted with a message. We have been entrusted with the good news. We have been sent out on a mission. What are we going to do with it? It's not optional. It's not if I feel like it. It's what God has called us to do and what God has called us to be. But there are many opportunities in many different ways to serve and to live this out. Right? So God has made us stewards of all that all that we have. He's entrusted it all to us. We must conduct ourselves as people under authority. People under authority. Not my own authority. Not my own pride. Not my own way. Not my own this. But I'm under His authority. We're accountable to Him. We are accountable to God. And so therefore we must, whether you look at the two slaves, the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, or Yeshua's warning of judgment, we must invest well so that what God has given us yields for His cause. Yields for His cause. Right? So, communally, we have certainly a particular calling for ourselves right now, right? And that is, we could say this not only individually, but among all of us, that we're all accountable. God has entrusted us, right? He's entrusted us with physical structure and property. He's entrusted us with a message. He has entrusted us with one another, with a particular calling. And so communally, we are accountable to God. Communally, for all that we say and all that we do, it's not, God blesses despite ourselves. Despite our sometimes mistakes and things of that nature. God is so kind indeed to us that we need to think deeply about what we do. So, of course, in the long view, it's everything, we have a living hope, and we need to live in this way every day of our lives, right? But we could say communally right now, there is something to be. What is it that God would have us do right now? It's interesting. When we think about this upcoming conference, and we think about Camp Yeladim as two examples of many things, may I suggest that we consider them, that we frame them both as something that we read about in Leviticus, in Vayikra. And that is holy convocations, holy assemblies, holy convocations. What is that? Appointed times. An appointed time, as we read in Leviticus, you name the holiday, an appointed time for worship, an appointed time for sacrifice, an appointed time for fellowship, an appointed time for growth. God says there are appointed times when I want you to appear before me, right? He's with them all the time, but there are specific times. And I would suggest that our weekly service, our Shabbat, is a holy convocation. That the oneg itself is a holy convocation. None of these are just ho-hum, let's get together, sing some songs, hear a message, and get out of here. Because I got other things to do today. Hopefully that is not how we approach any of it. Right? That it is indeed holy times. So that means if it is a holy time and God has served us, or has called us to serve in a particular way in these endeavors, right now, what a great opportunity of using all of what God has given us for his purpose. It means recognizing that something is happening that is greater than me, greater than my preferences, greater than my needs. I'm serving a great purpose of God. Now that is true just of being a Messiah follower in this world. Absolutely. But even in these small events, let us not underestimate what God can do and what God desires to do. Our desire is that when people come to this conference, that God does a work. Here we are all coming together, singing with one voice, worshiping, with one voice, one heart. May God have his way with us. May God call us to repentance. May God call us to a deeper understanding of who he is. May God call us to be a greater light to our Jewish community and the community at large. May we see it as more than a picnic and taking some seminars and seeing some people and all of that. May we see it as a privilege to serve. May we see it as a privilege to serve. So may we not miss out on the opportunity. Same thing with Camp Yeladim. These are important things. Obviously, there's lots of important things, right? But these are important things. And may we not take them lightly. I will say, I've said this before, but of course, just like Yeshua told a few stories to make a point, I will say that when it comes to both Camp Yeladim and this conference, I will say unabashedly that my children are who they are because, in part, and a large part, because of the community of this congregation, the community of that conference, of interacting with people their own age that have the same kind of messianic experience, and then Camp Yeladim. I'm happy to say that my kids were in year one, as well as Karen's kids were in year one of Camp Yeladim. And that, for all of the craziness and so on and so forth, it yields fruit. It's an investment. And it's an investment in ourselves, in our own walk with God. And I will just suggest it is part of what God has called us to. Yeshua has given us an opportunity. And perhaps he will say to us, so how did it go when you hosted that conference? How did it go? Or were you serving me? Were you, cooking food for me? Were you providing needs for me? Or not? And with our children, oh boy, same thing. Same thing. When we serve our kids at Camp Yeladim, we are serving Yeshua himself. So may we not be surprised on that day of accountability. Right? So just in finishing up, so what does it all come back to? Because it all comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? It all comes back to something we say every day. It all comes back to something that we've said already twice today. Well, in its fullness, twice today, or once today, but partially twice. And that is a passage that we're all familiar with. Oh, I think it says something like, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, with every bit of you. It's like, it's like the story of the Bible. That admonition. Love God with every ounce of your being. And how does that get explained? Love God, love people. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love God in all that we do. So, we have a great opportunity right now, right at this time, in this upcoming month of July, right, to serve Yeshua in a unique way. And may we do so with joy, and may we do so with vigor and with strength. And at the end of the day, may we sense a satisfaction, of having completed